far more likely to be depressed if you measure depression in a way that includes male symptoms of depression, much more likely to enter into places that take care of people who are mentally have mental problems and so on. And when boys, and so I started asking myself, what causes all this, and when I first submitted the Boy Crisis to the publisher and sort of in form of proposal, I outlined 10 causes. And those causes included the environment and schools and so on. But I kept coming back to realizing that the hub cause of the boy crisis was dad deprivation, that the boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. And so that got me really thinking about that. So for example, boys who are raised by moms and dads together and go from an intact family to a school that has very few male teachers, there's not a huge impact. A little bit of an impact that's negative, but not much. But if they go from a female-only home environment, have only a female role model, then they go to a school with almost no male teacher role models, they are much more subjected to, much more vulnerable to being seduced by gangs as a pseudo family, or trying to not having the postponed gratification that dads tend to bring to the family. And so therefore, without that postponed gratification, they're more vulnerable to a drug dealer saying you can make money really easily by dealing drugs. You don't have to worry about getting the best grades in school, and you'll prove everybody that you'll drive around in a nice car. You'll be able to get the girls you can't get because you're sort of a loser at school, et cetera. So I just started looking at all these things. I saw that the sperm count of boys had dropped 50%, that the IQs of boys had dropped 15%. And I started, looking and wondering about, two things. One is how much evidence there was for the boy crisis. And the second was exactly the question you asked. Since it's so evident and we're so focused on girls and women's issues, why are we not even seeing the boys and men's issues that are coming up, and how damaging it is to women to not have father involvement? For example, women that I had dated between my marriages were constantly talking about being overwhelmed. And so women are losers by fathers not being involved. Fathers feel a lack of purpose, and they deal with the whole thing that you talk about in your first rule of not having some type of change of culture where there's a vitality to give them purpose. And so we're in a very challenging situation. I did come to understand what the cause of it is, but it really is depressing to see how ubiquitous that cause is.
So why do you think, if the crisis is of the magnitude that you suggest, you cite some statistics in the early part of your book. More men in the UK have died by suicide in the past year than all British soldiers in all wars since 1945. Suicide now takes more lives than war, murder, and natural disasters around the world combined. That might not include COVID, I presume, that statistic. Stealing more than 36 million years of healthy life, and the rate of suicide is growing much faster for men than for women. You mentioned that boys' IQ has dropped about 15 points since the 1980s, and make a case in your book that that's related to fatherlessness. We'll get back into that. Boys scored lower than girls in the 63 largest developed nations in which the PISA, a set of international standard tests, was given. Boys are 50% more likely than girls to fail to meet basic proficiency in any of the three core subjects of reading, math, and science. By 8th grade in the US, 40% of girls are at least proficient in writing, compared to 1 in 5 boys. 1 in 5. Boys who perform as well as girls are graded less favorably. We did some research years ago showing that agreeable children get better grades than their IQ would predict, and girls are more agreeable than boys. And so what that means is if you're less agreeable and more likely to be troubled, then, because that is associated with being less agreeable, then you're graded more harshly than your pure cognitive ability would predict. And that probably accounts for the gender difference, or at least for part of it. Not that it particularly matters, but boys have gone from 61% of university degrees to 39%. Girls, the reverse. Percent of boys who say they don't like school has gone up 70% since 1980. I imagine it was already pretty high in 1980. Boys are expelled from school 3 times as often as girls. That's the same statistic, basically, as boys are more likely to be arrested for conduct disorder, juvenile delinquency. Men are much more likely to be imprisoned. It's the same pattern there. 1 in 3 children in the UK and the US grow up without a father. And, you know, our culture pushes the idea constantly that all families are of equal virtue, let's say. And I suppose that's justified in that it's self-evident that of all the things that people strive to do well in their lives, they strive to raise their children, I would say, more diligently than they might meet any other requirement or responsibility. And so it seems cruel to judge the quality of a family given the commitment that it takes, for example, to be a single parent. But I'm releasing a podcast this week with Richard Tremblay, who's perhaps the world's foremost authority on the development of aggression in children, development and regulation. And his data certainly indicates that having a single mother, especially a single mother with issues, is a predictor of the maintenance of aggressive behavior throughout the lifespan, a major predictor. Now, he associates that more with trouble on the maternal side, young mothers, young uneducated mothers with psychiatric and other health difficulties who lack social support. He hasn't concentrated so much on the fatherlessness end of it, but the upshot is, or the takeaway is the same. These are families that are not producing children who have the same probability of thriving, let's say. You said also Japan has increased its vocational education programs so that 23% of its high school graduates study at vocational schools, and they have a 99.6% employment rate. That's something we could talk about as well. So your book is peppered with, well, painful statistics, I would say. Why do you think we don't attend to this, Warren?
I think historically and biologically, men were programmed, and really through animals, including insects, right on through to human beings. We were programmed to be willing to die in order to get women's love. And so, in every generation had its war, and in